Hello and welcome to the Daily Bible Reading Show. We're looking at Genesis chapter 18, and this is verse 1. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre. They're doing music practice. We'll see how this goes. As he sat at the door of his tent. So this is talking about Abraham. So sitting at the door of his tent, kind of like what I'm doing right now, in the heat of the day. He didn't have air conditioning then, so he's sitting under this tree. Verse 2, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran to the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, "O Lord, if I found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you've come to your servant." You wonder, did Abraham know it was God? Because verse 1 says that the Lord appeared to him, and verse 4 said, "O Lord." For some reason, he sees these 3 people, and maybe he realizes that he is meeting God. I think "O Lord" can also mean master or boss. You know how you go to the mama store and everyone calls each other boss. So Lord can have that kind of overtone of respect. But I think there are hints here that Abraham realizes that this could be someone of great significance, possibly God himself. And he offers him what it says here, verse 4, a little water to rest, to wash your feet, to rest under the tree, while he brings a morsel of bread. So just a bite to eat, as it were, a snack. And this is Abraham being very hospitable. It's just offering him a snack, offering him a place to rest his feet. Hi, hello, how are you doing? No, please don't be. So they said, "Do as you've said," verse 6, and Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes." So he runs to his wife's tent. He says, "Bake a cake." And I think 3 seahs sounds like a lot of flour. I think he's intending to make a feast. He's trying to make a lot of snacks for his guests. He's trying to be very, very generous. Kneaded and make cakes, verse 6. Verse 7, and Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. So we hear a lot of this running by Abraham. He's like 99 years old at this point of time, and he's running everywhere, just rushing to get all the food prepared, and he's choosing from the best. He runs to the herd, he chooses this calf. He says they're tender and good. So he really wants to give them a treat. He really wants to splurge on them through this meal. Verse 8, then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So just like standing there while all of them were eating. Well, God was eating this meal that he prepared before them. And I guess this is the closest you can get to an omakase. And I'm not sure whether you've ever been on, I've never been on an omakase. I've only ever seen it in TikTok videos, where essentially it's a Japanese word where you go to a restaurant and they prepare the food for you. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but omakase means chef's choice. Essentially, the chef or the owner of the restaurant prepares the very best kind of food, and it's usually very expensive, but they prepare it for you because they think this is the best of the produce, this is the best kind of food that I can prepare for you to be able to enjoy this feast. And this is Abraham, deciding what God's going to have as a snack, as a meal, as it turns out. And you see this eagerness, this generosity, but I think you also see, on the other hand, this side of worship. Abraham bows down to the ground. It says that again and again as an act of worship, but also this generosity is also an act of worship. And I guess, I think I'll stop here. I'll just look at these few verses and try to see the connection between these two acts of devotion, worship and generosity, through this omakase meal for God. And what we see here is, I guess, on one level, relationship. This is Abraham trying to extend his love, his welcome to these strangers through his generosity. And it's an act of friendship. That's what we tend to do here in Malaysia, right? Sometimes when people argue over like the paying of the bill, they're trying to say, I want this to be my treat. I want to be generous towards you because I want to show you that you're a friend, and so I want to pay the bill, that kind of thing. And that's what Abraham does here. He says initially, just a morsel, just a little bit of water, just have a little rest, and then he turns up with all this food. He turns up with the very best that he can offer. And it shows again that desire for this deeper relationship with God. Hello, hi, yeah. And it's through his generosity. It costs him something, but at the same time, he's happy to do this. And I guess, worship, we tend to think of it in many different ways. The guys in the next hall, they're practicing for the evening service, and that's, in one sense, worship. It's singing towards God, giving praise towards God. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have people who talk about how all of life is worship. Your work, the way that you live your life, the holiness and the blamelessness, and just that consciousness of God is one way that you're able to worship God, not just on a Sunday, but every day through your living, through your walk before God. And so in between these two extremes, well, they are complementary, the spectrum of worship. Here we have relationship. And I think it's maybe even at the center of what it means to have this relationship with God. It's something that isn't just something that you do, but it's something that you're able to relate to God. That's something even God allows you to do for Him, that you're able to worship Him, you're able to give Him something that makes Him smile, that gives Him joy. And that's an amazing thing. I think it's a privilege for Abraham to be able to do this for God. Okay, how are you doing? Yeah, for him to be able to prepare a meal for God. That's worth thinking about. I think if you think about even like your pastor turning up at home and seeing how messy your home is, some people, that's why they don't want the pastor to come around. Or even going out for a meal with someone you really, really respect, like your boss. You feel kind of like intimidated. And maybe sometimes, again, that's why you don't want to do that. You don't want to meet your heroes because you don't want to let them down. You don't want them to let you down. But here we see Abraham very, very eager. He didn't expect God to turn up. He was just hanging out in the midday sun. It was really, really warm. And then God turns up. And all of a sudden, he springs into action. He runs here, tells his wife to make the cakes, maybe because he didn't know how to bake. He runs there, he pulls the best of the herd, just to assemble something that he would be able to offer up before God, again, as this act of generosity. And I guess, again, for us, in terms of worship, it means that maybe there's a kind of spontaneity to that. It isn't just something that, you just prepare for, you practice for, but it's an overflow. What if God turned up today? What if God said, could we go out for teh tarik? Could we go out for a meal? How spontaneously joyful and eager will we be to respond to that offer, to be able to hang out with God? Yeah. By the way, I think there's an overtone here of Abraham's generosity that we see in the New Testament. And I get this from Abraham, he running and preparing that calf, that tender young calf. And I think, remember there was that parable that Jesus told in Luke chapter, oh my goodness, where is it again? The parable of the prodigal son. I think it's Luke chapter 15. Yeah, it is Luke chapter 15. I remember that the son ran away and the son repented and he was wondering, will my dad receive me back? Will I be able to go back home? And when his dad sees him from far off, this is Luke chapter 15, verse 20, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And this was something that was maybe not very dignified for a father in a Middle Eastern culture to do, to run all the way to his son, especially if it's dishonored him. But no, he runs the same way that Abraham ran. And Abraham did something that was, almost humiliating. He was almost acting like the servant. He was almost acting like a waiter for God. But, he was willing to do this out of love. And here the father runs to the son. And then verse 21, the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But, verse 22, the father said to his servant, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hands, shoes on his feet. Verse 23, bring the fattened calf. And so that's the connection, bring the best meal, the best meat. Today would be Wagyu meat. And bring it and serve it before him. Let's eat and let's celebrate. And I guess, I'm not sure what the connection is, but I do see overtones, similarities of Abraham preparing this meal. And here I guess God acting as the father, preparing this meal for sons who've run away from him, and God welcoming them. And I think it's not just us having to worship God with everything we have and being generous. And sometimes we aren't as generous, aren't as eager, aren't as joyful to worship God as we should be. But here we see God is not that way. God is more than eager, more than generous, and more than willing to splurge in order to welcome us back into his family. On our end, for us that expression is worship. But when God does this, when God is generous, when God is eager, when God is joyful, that results in our salvation. And that's the gospel, that even though we might not do this, though we should, God has done this through the Lord Jesus Christ. And we have but to receive this. We have but to recognize that this is the kind of God that we have. He is generous. He wants to pour out all that he has so that we can come back and we can repent and we can call him our Father. Yeah, I think that's all I have for now. Again, just a quick look again at Genesis chapter 18. Abraham having this omakase meal that he prepares before God, showing his generosity. But then looking at the flip side to that when God does this, when God prepares this meal for us, when he does it generously and sacrificially for us, it results in love for us, it results in salvation of sons back into his family.